Production support for InFocus is provided by Smithville, a locally owned business serving central and southern Indiana since 1922 with residential and business internet, voice, and security services. Smithville, local pride, global technology. Information at smithville.net. Hoosier Energy, providing electricity for central and southern Indiana electric cooperatives and their member customers. Information at hepn.com. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
President Obama has declared the war in Iraq over. After more than 7 years and an estimated 1.5 million troops serving in the war, more than 4,400 soldiers dying and another 32,000 being wounded, the demands of war have stretched the limits of Americans, both financially and emotionally. So how do the country and the state of Indiana continue to prepare for the call of duty? We'll discuss the effects of the war as we put international affairs and the military in focus. Thanks for joining us for this edition of In Focus. I'm Stan Jastrzebski. If you have questions for one of our studio experts during tonight's program, please email us at infocus@indiana.edu or call us at 1-800-987-9848. At the beginning of next year, the Indiana National Guard is scheduled to deploy more units to Iraq. WTIU's Shamika Neely reports on how Indiana continues to figure into the overseas conflict.
During 7 years of war in Iraq, an estimated 1.5 million troops have served overseas, including almost 20,000 Hoosiers. More than 4,400 soldiers have fallen in the line of duty. One Indiana expert says that there are specific ways to organize parties in conflict so that one doesn't have an extra edge over the opposing party. But the U.S. is falling behind.
Well, it may be a little bit too late right now to engage in a major reorganization of the effort there. And part of it is because all the mistakes that have been done since the beginning of the involvement in Afghanistan, ideally, all those efforts should have been centralized to achieve one goal and use the money more efficiently to help the Afghans move to where they need to move. And this hasn't been done. So much money has been wasted, so much ill will has been created, so much corruption has been created. The Taliban can last much longer than 6 months. They already lasted for 10 years vis-a-vis the United States. And so they may sometimes send some negotiators, but frankly, they're playing the United States.
Not all of the Indiana troops stationed in Iraq have returned home, and another batch of Indiana National Guard soldiers will head to Afghanistan after the first of the year. Tonight, we'll discuss the effects overseas conflicts have had on Indiana families and the way they're preparing for the USA's evolving role on the world stage as we put the effect of war on Indiana in focus.
And joining me this evening is my co-host, Sarah Whitmire. Sarah, who's in the booth with you this evening?
Good evening, Stan. Tonight we'll be hearing from Dr. James Lutz. He's a professor of political science at Indiana University's Fort Wayne campus, and Dr. Rafi Ravini, and he'll talk to us about the international political economy. That coming up in just a bit.
Thanks, Sarah. Also joining us this evening are Dr. Nassif Shahrani, a professor in the anthropology department at Indiana University who focuses on Central Asian and Middle Eastern studies. Also, Lieutenant Colonel Kirk White from the Indiana National Guard, and Dr. David Fidler, who's a professor in IU's Maurer School of Law. Thanks to all of you for being here. And I want to start with sort of a general question about the perception of war these days. I think a lot of people watching a war from South Central Indiana might think of films they've seen of World War II or Vietnam. Dr. Shahrani, we'll start with you and we'll move down our panel. Is it logical to think of war in that context, or is that an outdated idea, do you think, of what war means these days?
Well, the fact that there are soldiers on the ground fighting anywhere and there are casualties involved, then the difference between now and World War I or II or Vietnam, for that matter, Korea, is not that important. But certainly there are differences in the technology of warfare, and the extent of casualties, perhaps to the local communities, is far larger, far greater, although there is some control on it, but still war is war, which expends quite a lot of our resources, particularly in dollars. And of course, our young people, man and woman, get killed, and many others get seriously injured, and they have to be brought back to be looked after. both by, with the state paying for the costs, the families suffering. So I think war now and in the past is something of a disaster for communities who experience it, and one hopes that alternatives could be looked for, and we need to do some things about peace building, and educating people both here and overseas to not think of war is the alternative.
Lieutenant Colonel White, what about you, looking at it from the inside, so to speak?
Well, I think one of the main differences you'll notice is in today's conflict, certainly in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we've been engaged after the initial movement in to where you're able to oust the government that's causing the problem and the destabilizing factors. You then switch to what we consider to be a counterinsurgency, and that's different than a day-to-day shooting war. And so from the soldier perspective, we have to train from a different view. This is more of a conflict where we're having to work in the communities where we're serving.
I keep hearing hearts and minds over and over.
That's a good way to look at it. And that's exactly has been my experience. In general, the Afghan people are tired of 30 years of war that they've had. They'd rather move on to other things. There's a very small minority of extremists who want to destabilize things the way they want them to be. So you don't have these huge land battles. You have small engagements. But for the most part, the majority of what our forces are doing in Afghanistan right now is working in the communities, the provinces and the districts with the villages, and doing our best to train the Afghan police and security forces so that they can stand on their own and have a legitimate government, not just at the national level, but more importantly at the local level, because that's really the best way to make Afghanistan successful.
Dr. Fidler, what's your view about the way we look at war these days?
Well, I want to build on some of the points that Kurt made, particularly about the nature of this type of conflict, and also to some extent the conflict in Iraq, and it goes to the practice of counterinsurgency and the strategy that's being taken. As Kurt knows, counterinsurgency is a different kind of conflict, and for the most part it's really a political conflict where the military is in support of civilian activities, of political activities. So from the perspective of local communities who are used to a cleaner, simpler form of armed conflict, this is very confusing. And I think part of the confusion comes from citizens in our cities and towns and in the rural areas looking at the policy confusion that comes out of Washington, D.C. with regards to what are we doing in Afghanistan and Iraq, what exactly is counterinsurgency. And I think we've seen this to some extent in the midterm elections with regards to how U.S. military overseas involvement has factored into how people look at the direction in which we're going. And in teaching counterinsurgency and working with the Indiana National Guard, in preparing soldiers and civilians to go overseas, one of the hardest things to communicate to people is the extraordinarily difficult nature of counterinsurgency. And I think that's been something that people have. Are we doing nation building? Are we fighting a conflict? Are we doing both? How exactly is this going to work out? How long is this going to take? I think that's been the source of a lot of confusion and consternation in communities, not only in Indiana, but I think around the United States.
I want to get back to this discussion in just a second, but right now we have to send it over to Sarah Whitmire in the WFIU studio. Sarah?